Siri, define writer's block.
Writer's block, a psychological inhibition preventing a writer from being able to proceed with a story.
Great. That is zero help whatsoever.
The Help, a historical fiction novel set in the 1960s that was later adapted to a drama film in 2011 directed by...
Wait, no, I just need ideas on how to keep creativity flowing because I'm struggling to know what to write next. I need to keep my story fresh and exciting.
Siding, a cladding material for the outside of a building, or...
Never mind.
Hey!
I'm your host, Sarah, and
I'm your other host, Morgan.
We're two sisters
by marriage
who love to talk about stories.
From writing fiction and creating elaborate plot lines in D&D
to keeping your storytelling on track without feeling blocked.
We're Out of Initiative. In this episode of Out of Initiative, we dive into the realm of imagination and explore strategies to conquer writer's block and retake control of your creativity. We hope this episode provides practical tips and insights for overcoming creative barriers and reigniting the spark of inspiration. Today we're talking about writing in general, as well as within the context of Dungeon Masters crafting immersive Dungeons & Dragons or TTRPG campaigns. I feel like I'm sliding into the Siri voice again, but we're gonna manage.
Maybe that's just where you are. That's
might just be where I am today.
Tonight. Yeah. How are you, Morgan?
I'm good. How are you, Sarah? I feel like it's been a minute.
I know, it has.
We skipped 1 week of D&D and now I feel like I barely know you and you're a stranger. I feel like a baby whose father just shaved his beard. I'm like, who even are you?
Yeah, I know. And then we talk about D&D, which just makes us want to play D&D more. So I guess it's kind of scratches the itch.
Cycle. Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does. So, writer's block. I mentioned this as a topic because it's something that I feel like I'm constantly plagued with. I know imposter syndrome tells me I'm alone in this, but my logical brain tells me that other people face this as well. Please, for the love of God, tell me I'm not alone.
You are definitely not alone. And I think the first thing to address with writer's block is it exhibits different symptoms with different people. So what you have as writer's block might not be exactly what another writer has, but a lot of the ways to overcome it's the same. So for those that don't do a lot of writing, or you just have heard writer's block but aren't like familiar specifically, writer's block boils down to you being stuck and not knowing what to put on the page, whether it's for a story or a campaign, maybe like a character's background. It could be any of these things. And it's just basically you're just stuck and you don't know what comes next or how to get started on a certain area in your writing.
How is that different from drafting a story? Like maybe I'm storyboarding or I'm in the thick of writing and I'm not sure what comes next, but I wouldn't call myself blocked. Like there's a difference there, right?
Yeah. So there can be, you could say perhaps have chapter 1 written and you know what happens in chapter 3, but you don't know how to get from chapter 1 to chapter 3. And so chapter 2, you're blocked on. You don't know, something needs to happen, like a bridge needs to happen for you to get to chapter 3, but you don't know how to fill in the gap. And that's where there are some techniques and some advice that really helps you kind of get the creative juices going. And that could help with campaigns too. If you know you need your characters to get to this certain place, what could drive them to go there and move the story forward in a fun, exciting way. And this, you can get stuck.
You said Bridge, and all I can think about was Bridge of Eternity by Amelia Cole, which is coming out next month.
It is.
Am I allowed to plug your book?
Yeah, and I have my book here. I just bumped the microphone. Yep. Yeah, July 8th comes out.
Bridge. That's so soon.
Yeah.
You said Bridge, and that's all I can think about, so that's brief self-plug.
I don't know how else you would. Yeah, but that's one type of writer's block. Sometimes it's just starting a story. You just don't know where to start it. And I've gotten into that before. Beginnings are very, very hard. And I think we had a whole episode about that. Yeah. I will go back and rewrite a beginning multiple times. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is to just write it and then just know you're going to fix it later. There's been times where I've like written the beginning and I end up cutting the first 2 chapters and we start in chapter 3, just because it's like I just needed to write it for myself so I could know when I needed to start the story.
That's super hard and I don't like it.
Yeah, so that's my experience with writer's block has definitely been, I know this happens and then this happens, so how do I get from one to the other that's organic and fun and exciting and fits what my character would do, that kind of thing. That's the part that I really struggle with. Um and I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that I've overcome it, but I think a lot of it stems from just kind of feeling like creatively stuck. Like you get frustrated and there's a lot of self-doubt, which you've mentioned. And I
Oh, yeah.
think
Oh, yeah.
a lot of
I
writers
circle the drain on that bad boy all the time.
and dungeon masters both feel that. And I think there was somewhere it was like comparison is the killer of creativity. It is number one. And that self-doubt and the imposter syndrome, nothing will stop your writing and your creativity faster. So figure out ways to overcome that or to at least acknowledge it, but move past it. We spoke about this before, having other writers to talk to and bounce ideas off of and just get excited about your writing. And either they beta read for you or they talk about their stories or you read their stories and you go, oh, this is really good. How can I do this? Or you help them get better. I've found a lot of joy in critiquing other people's work and then they critique mine. It just grows both your skills and it just kind of gives you that boost, that confidence, that even if they're an amazing writer, like everyone starts with a first draft. Everyone starts with something that's rough. And it just gives you more perspective on the process. Instead of just seeing a finished book, you like see as it gets better and better. So that's been something.
This briefly, like a little brief tangent here.
Yeah.
Editing other people's work or thinking critically from an editorial lens on someone else's work is so important to your skills because you start to notice the feedback that you want to give them. You start to like hone in, what am I missing?
Yeah.
You told me that the curtains are blue. Do they need to be? Do they have a reason for it? Are they just blue curtains? Like, let's flesh out each of these little individual pieces. I want to like talk through all these little individual pieces and giving that feedback, thinking hard about how the other writer is feeling, getting in their head as they're looking at a piece. I find that editing is one of the biggest builders of my own skills because like reading, right? Reading for fun. When we get to editing, it means you're exposed to more work and you're thinking critically about it, which will help you think more critically about your own work.
And there is a big difference between when you're writing and when you're revising. Like they talk about like you have a revising hat and you have like a drafting hat. It's the same. Like you have a playing hat and then you have like a DM hat. It's a different skill set. It's a different way your mind works. And if I get through a big revision, I find that I go into the next draft and struggle because I've just come off of a manuscript that's polished and nice and perfect. And I'm going in and just mucking around in the mud again. And so I really have to give myself a break before I just dive back into drafting because the whole time I'm just like, this is garbage. This is garbage. Why am I wasting my time? This is garbage. And I just keep saying that and I just keep writing. And because I just came off of something that's really good. And I often will read in between so I can read something else really polished and take my mind off of everything. But that's hard. It's really hard to pivot. And I can't do it fast. I usually need a little bit of a break to recover. How about you? Like, can you just revise draft back and forth or do you?
No, I cannot. And even I was actually going to say one of the challenges for me is like a more completed campaign that we're drafting versus starting a new campaign. The starting a new campaign has been the most daunting, overwhelming and terrifying thing, because I just got done with this world where the characters were alive, the people were alive, I knew all the characters' names. You get so familiar with it, and even though it's it's a D&D campaign, it's never going to be as polished, right? I'm not publishing it, so it's never going to be as polished as a piece that I'm drafting specifically to publish, or with the intent of publishing. I haven't published anything, and unlike you, so I can't really like put that stake in the
Soon.
ground. I'm
6
gonna see how many
days.
times I can poke this.
7 days, 6
6
days.
days. 7 days,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. What is time?
So that shift from what even is time? That shift from a completed campaign to something new is really hard, and I found my current strategy, both for creative writing fiction and working on D&D campaigns or TTRPG campaigns under any system, is not actually drafting. It's going like even cruder than that. Like, what's the roughest outline I can possibly pencil in? Point A, point B, point C, and then like start to fill in a little bit, and then it gets like fuller and fuller every time I take another pass. So right now we're working on the next D&D campaign, and step 1 was, let's just sit and have workshop conversations about what we want the world to look like, and just taking the roughest possible notes. Nothing is narrative, nothing makes any sense yet, nothing is linked together, and finding that every pass I go through these notes, they get fuller, they get more robust, they start to make more sense, until I'm like, okay, I'm ready to start some narrative. What is that point A that the players are going to get at, so that chapter 1, I know where they're going to start, and I know what options they have for chapter 2, because that comparison when you were talking about what we're blocked in chapter 2, right? I can't get from A to B. Really applies in D&D too. So
It
I'm trying to like
does.
wrap everything in under one umbrella. I feel like I always try to do this thing where I'm like, can I tie everything together all at once? No, but she'll try.
One of the benefits of doing D&D is if they go into this dungeon and they need to find this one item, and you put things in between for them to find, you don't have to fill in the blank, the players do. So it's collaborative storytelling. So you know that this happens and then this happens, and you can just, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times you can just leave it open. And how they get to that point, whatever they do, spells or combat or negotiating, it's all open for them. You just do those points. So what you're doing is, I think, perfect, where you're just doing like the main big beats and then just fill it in as you need to, as you want to. With the world building is obviously different, but like once you're actually figuring out campaign arc, I would leave some spaces, let the players fill it in,
I have been leaving lots of space. And I think the challenge for me is like, if I know that I want them to meet this person who gives them this quest, and then after that they need to have a reason to come back to town, that point B, that like that going from A to C, that point B in the middle is really like, what incentive do they have? What reasons would they have? Is it that I have such a compelling NPC they feel like they have to come back and talk to them?
Yeah.
Is it that they we've talked about this with our other DM, is the town on fire and the players are invested in these people, and therefore are going to come back and try to help? That's a pretty compelling way, like smoke in the distance, coming from the houses of the people the characters care about. It's a pretty gosh darn compelling way to get people back, to be that point B, getting them to the next story beat. And that is also probably typically my advice, is like throw a disaster at your characters, both in writing and in D&D. Give them something like just absolutely impossible to overcome. Be so mean to them, and that usually will help me kind of work through like, how are they going to act in the scene? The characters that I'm writing, not the characters that people are playing. How are they going to interact with the scene? How are they going to interact with this disaster? And what resources do they need internally or externally to overcome this challenge? That's my either a really rough outline or a disaster. Those are the only two options for me, apparently, when it comes to overcoming writer's block.
One of the best pieces of writerly advice I got from an author was to have your character early in the story state their biggest fear out loud, whether it's in their head or to someone else. and be like, I can't ever get with this guy. He's whatever. And have them say it out loud. And then when it happens in the story, it just is so satisfying to the reader. They said, oh my gosh, that is the worst thing that could happen to this character. And here it is. It's kind of like the smoking gun, right? If they say it out loud, that's the biggest fear as a reader or a player. You know it's going to happen. You know it's going to show up. And I think you can do that with D&D characters too. Like if you have in your background, this is their biggest fear, like of losing a loved one, or to having the warlock's patron fully make them evil. Like that's their biggest fear. Have them confront it. And in D&D, you can do multiple times. Multiple times they could be confronted with something that's, could possibly tip them over the edge.
Is it Chekhov's gun? I just had this moment of like,
I just say smoking gun, but I think it is. Yeah.
Chekhov's gun. Yeah, I had to do a quick Google because I couldn't remember. I feel like I've also heard leave a gun on the table. I've heard that as writer advice too. Like give that like thing for the we've talked about this in a podcast episode in the past.
We
like,
have
put that thing on the table for the characters to interact with. Like put it there so that
if you do,
we can build some tension for the if you do,
use it. You better use it.
Yeah, use it.
Yeah, and with your D&D characters, it's hard when you have your players, but yeah, if their biggest fear is turning fully evil, or their biggest fear is losing, a parent or a spouse or whatever, there needs to be multiple instances where they confront that fear. And I think that just ups the tension, and it just shows their growth, and it shows what they're willing to do, for like how far they're willing to go. And I think that's one of the biggest. Anyways, that's writer advice. Have your characters state their fear, and then later on, give them that fear, or make them confront it.
I like that because it means you have to know what their biggest fear is, and that's something I always like to tell players when they come to the table is like, what does your character want? I think sometimes with a new character, from the D&D perspective, sometimes with a new character, you don't have all that information yet, especially really early on. So with the last campaign we ran, something that I really felt worked well was we let the party run, did a couple of like the first few levels, they leveled up pretty quickly, very simple, pretty low stakes interaction as is starting to lay the groundwork for the story. And then had one-on-one interviews with each player as they hit like I think it was level 5. Like, hey, we've been playing this for a while and I have these questions for you. What does your character want? What are they afraid of? What do they hope that they will get? What do they think they're afraid of? What are they actually afraid of? Like the known unknown. And just have these little one-on-ones with everybody, and then I just had those documents open every time we would play. And in every session I could like go back and reference like, he's a bird, but he's afraid of flight. And I wonder if maybe this is the moment, like, let me look back at his document and see. And it also gives the players, an opportunity to say, I sure hope to overcome this, or I sure hope that this absolutely debilitating anxiety that my character has, I would love it to not be resolved. I would, it gives them that opportunity that like, if you could sit at the table as you're writing fiction, if you could sit at the table across from one of your characters and say like, what do you want to happen? Like that is like the beauty of D&D when we talk about collaborative storytelling. It's like the characters are literally alive. They're literally living, breathing people, being played by living, breathing people, and they can weigh in. And that's so cool.
Yeah. I love that you keep that like as notes. So then you can always like in a certain instance, pull it up and be like, oh, you're afraid of heights. Here you go. You're the only, you're up on a skyship now and it's going to crash. And so I like that. We didn't crash it. We did
No, it was run aground a couple times, but it was pretty intentional. Yeah.
And we did the river. We took it on a actual.
Yeah, you did take it on the actual literal river, which the player and player character, who were both afraid of heights, delighted to not be in the air. They loved that. You mentioned earlier, when we talked about critiquing other writers' work, exchanging writers' work, talking about your story with someone else. I think there's this ongoing notion that Dungeon Master's the forever DM, right? In writers, I think we have the I can find my crit buddy, like my critique partner. I can go through. I mean, we're not using Twitter anymore, so like I don't even know where you would start with that. That's as social media changes. I'm actually like
There's
genuinely
some
unsure.
good Discord groups
Ah,
that are for writing that you can find if you want to do sprints, if you just want brainstorming. Lots of good Discord groups. I haven't been on Reddit much for writing, but there might be some stuff there. But
well, I'm
yeah.
on Tumblr now, pretty much exclusively. So that's
But yeah,
I'm
Discord
over there finding people.
Discord has some really good writing groups. So, highly recommend.
That's cool. I like that. Okay, so
Yeah.
Discord is an option,
Mhm.
but if you're a GM or a DM and
Mhm.
you're that forever GM and you feel like I can't talk about my story with, say, my partner or my roommate who is not invested, that's sort of the classic, right? Or any of my players who know the world because I don't want to give them any spoilers. I don't want to like
Mhm.
give anything away.
Mhm.
Um, that I feel like I want to just always tell people to stop worrying so much about that. Like there are other people who want to talk to you. This is where you again go back to your social media groups, scroll through Tumblr, find people who are talking about it and like just start a conversation. And it might take you a few tries to find someone who's interested in the genre of story, the depth of story. But you know, connecting with an old friend, I actually connected with an old friend from college recently. As I can't remember even what prompted me to message her, but I sent her a message and was like, "Hey, you know, we ran into each other at a wedding, and I know you're really into D&D, and had you know just started this conversation." And she and I have now had this like ongoing back and forth dialogue, talking about what's going on in our stories and what we're struggling with, and it's just been this like really nice sort of background conversation and like outlet to talk about our stories. She commissions a lot of art and has like a pretty intense horror story that she's working through, and it's so cool to just get someone else's perspective, someone whose brain is so different, to talk about what works, what doesn't work, exchange advice. And so just like don't be brought down and like sidle yourself with that concept of I'm the forever DM. I have no one to talk to, because there are lots of people who want to talk about your D&D story. We've mentioned this before and I'll say it again. Like please always feel free to hit us up. We always want to hear about your
Always.
story.
Always. Yeah.
So please always feel free to tell us if you have
Yeah.
things you want to talk about with your D&D story or with your whatever piece you're writing right now.
We will always talk story or D&D.
Yeah.
Drop of a hat anytime. And I know a lot of DMs and a lot of writers. A lot of what our endeavors are pretty isolating, and they
Yeah.
can be pretty lonely because it's a lot of times
Yeah.
just you and a computer for hours and the voices in your head. And I community and finding at least one other person that you can just bounce ideas off of and they can send you, it's just, it definitely helps with your creativity, your inspiration, and as you said, you get different perspectives and different ideas. And I mean, it's amazing. It just encourages you to keep going and pursue your passion more. And I think that's I you know, I think DMs, I think on Reddit there's like a DM Academy that is
Mhm.
pretty good, that they have lots of spoilers. So like if you're a player, don't go there. I mean, unless you're intending to be a DM, because it's all of the campaigns and all the spoilers. But a lot of people seem very ready to weigh in. And I'm sure there's discords too that
Oh
are
yeah, I think
related
there
to
are.
DMs and wanting to talk world building or just problems that come up in their campaign or sessions. Because, and we've discussed this too, is I'll run a DM or I'll run a session, and then we do virtual, and then I shut off the camera, and then it's silence. I don't
Mhm.
know if they had a good time. I mean, bye, have a good time, have a good day. And then it's just silence after like 3 hours of like pouring myself into these characters and running this whole everything, the combat and the NPCs and making sure the story's moving, and then it's just silence. And I've gotten better, like I've learned, like it's okay. We have a really good group chat that helps kind of keep that, like if someone shares a gif after the game or someone talks about something, like that's very encouraging. Like, okay, they did like it. Because
Yeah.
it's the silence is so loud when you're done.
Yeah.
And if you play in person, it's probably different because you can be like, let's get snacks or go out to dinner or whatever. And you can talk about it
Yeah.
afterwards. But a lot of times online, which I think a lot of us are doing that now, it is really quiet afterwards. And you're like, well, hopefully they had a good time. I think so. You know. And
For our
writing's that way too.
biannual
Like you publish
Yeah.
your book and you're like, well, I guess to leave a
Okay,
review
hope I
or
get reviews. Yeah.
yeah. It's just you just yeet it into the world and then you're just quiet again. I'm serious. It's like
Yeah.
the weirdest feeling because you're like, bye. Like you send a kid to college. Like I hope I did you good and you don't end up on the evening news. Like I don't know.
I often feel like my stories are going to end up on the evening news, and I only ever hope it's for good reasons. That's yeah,
it's
I
true.
agree. You mentioned campaigns, like
Yeah.
pre-written campaigns, like modules. And we are talking about writer's block, and I feel very strongly that you can still get writer's block even when the content is already generated for you.
Oh yeah.
That creative block absolutely exists. I know I hit that a lot with Waterdeep Dragon Heist. We've talked about in the past. I am not a big fan of pre-written modules because I struggle so much with them. Talk to me a little bit about your DMing experience and moving into a pre-written module and any time that you've hit a creative block with that.
So with Curse of Strahd, I did something that when you're running a module, they always have this golden rule that you should read it cover to cover. And there are certain modules you should do that with. Curse of Strahd is one of them. It's very sandboxy. Something that can happen in chapter 7 can relate to something that happens in chapter 2, and your players can bounce around. So you kind of need to know in the back of your mind, if they meet this NPC, what will they know at that time, that kind of thing. Well, there's other modules that you don't. You can just kind of read the chapter next, like as you move along. And I feel since I read it completely through, I've now read it multiple times completely through. But as I've read it completely through, there are certain parts in it that I know you're not even going to talk to this NPC. I'm just going to completely cut him out because I don't feel it'll move anything in the story. It's not relevant to any of the characters' backstories. It's not relevant for any reason. So then I cut it out. But then I'm faced with, okay, so now if there is something that you're missing, where can I put it now? What other NPC can give that information? Or how else can you find it? And I have discovered, based on my players and the feedback they've given me, there are certain NPCs that they like, right? Or ones they don't.
Oh, yeah.
And so the ones they like, they keep coming back to. They're the ones that they're more in Curse of Strahd. You guys don't trust anybody. Like immediately, you don't trust them. So there are a choice few that you do trust. And I know that if they tell you something, you're going to believe them, or they tell you to go somewhere, you're going to at least try to or help them. And so I put a lot of information in those ones that wouldn't normally be in the module.
Smart. Yeah.
And that's all based on player feedback. So, and I think I can only do that because I've read it completely through. And so I know what key points you need to know during certain times in the campaign. And I've just, instead of having this random NPC that you meet one time that tells you one thing and then disappears, I'm having it like a reoccurrent NPC that you trust. And as time goes on, you can trust them more and more. So that's one way I've kind of adapted with the module. But there are certain parts in it I've read and I'm like, I don't like any of this, or this feels too dark, or this feels like something my players wouldn't enjoy. This feels like it'd take too long. There is a portion of the module that you guys are going to be approaching soon that does not have a lot in it. It is very much left open. And I don't know if it was intentional or if they just didn't put a lot in it. Like, you're going to be exploring this place and there's just a lot of empty rooms. Like it's
Oh.
odd. So I got online and looked up in the Discord, the Curse Strahd Discord, how other DMs have made that enjoyable, or what they've added, or what they've taken away. And I get a ton of inspiration on, oh, if you do this, this triggers that, and it just makes it more fun, and it actually gives it meaning and purpose. And I think, as we discussed, if you can find other DMs to talk to, they provide so much good feedback. Like, oh, I've run Curse of Strahd like 5 times, and my players loved this one thing. And you just get that constant, um, instead of just an echo chamber with yourself, you get this constant like feedback of
Yeah.
what in the module you should keep and what you shouldn't. I know people do run it verbatim. I want it more organic. I always feel like more organic in D&D usually equals more fun. And I think with modules, as you probably like, sometimes it's very boxed in.
It's so
And
boxed in. Yeah, I
yeah,
really don't like it.
yeah. So I think if you know the source material enough, and you're comfortable enough knowing how to keep the story progressing without breaking anything major, I would deviate quite a bit. Use, like you were saying, like a skeletal outline, pun intended, because it's Curse of Strahd. Use a very weak outline of A to B to C, and then let kind of fill in that way. So yeah, that's one thing I've done, is adapted as the campaign has gone on, what my players are enjoying, or who they're places they like to go, and what we've discussed this before. The stakes of a player death, while it's sad, every one of players and characters, they would not care if their character died. Like, they would be sad, but then they'd be like,
Whoa, hey, whoa, I would care a lot. I would care a lot. Let's be clear.
What I'm trying to say is, they would sacrifice themselves for another character. Oh, yeah. They're very selfless. You guys are very selfless. And so the stakes of this person, this character death, is not as much as that character's companion's death. Seeing, and you guys all just feel so self-sacrificing. So I've had to change. You have fear. Characters have fear of death, but I feel like they fear more. They care about other, like they would wholeheartedly give themselves up if it meant saving another character. So with Curse of Strahd, I've had to kind of pivot that and make, like, this person's in danger, or this person is cursed. And so then that's a little bit more stakes. So, but that's just with my group, with our group.
Yeah. I think you touched on something that is an area that I struggle with modules forever, and will probably not return to modules for this reason, which is reading it cover to cover. I think Wizards of the Coast gets a lot of side eye over a lot of their modules in general, and maybe I haven't read cover to cover. I've played it, but I haven't read cover to cover Dragon by Spare Peak, but it seemed like maybe that was a little bit easier to work with. But for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which I would argue is one of the better modules, it's pretty modern. I had some really cool stuff in it. It was just like, frankly, boring. It's super boring to read a campaign book from cover to cover.
It is.
Like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'm not invested. I don't have that much control over it. And I get blocked before prepping a session if I need, like, if I'm being told I have to read. I'm not saying I have an issue with authority, but I am. No, wait, hold on. Get on track, Morgan. So what I'm trying to say is, I just, when you're trying to prep and things get really boring, if it's not compelling, and like you're saying, if I'm not sure the players are having a good time, it's really hard to get invested in preparing for the next session. And like convincing myself to sit down and like take some notes, or staring at that blank page, that blinking cursor, and saying, okay, I know exactly what I need to put here. It can get really hard. And so I find that often the trick that worked best for me when I'm working through a module and I get blocked on something is exactly what you're saying. Homebrew something. I'm going to make a change. I don't like that they need to go here. Instead, I would like this person to have an issue, or whatever is supposed to happen to this NPC is now going to happen to a player character. Making those little changes made it a little more fun and helped me like stay invested, and worry less about the fact that I'm making a change, and now if someone goes back and reads this, they're going to see that it's different. There's a lot of anxiety in there.
Yeah, yeah. I think Curse of Strahd's pretty good. There's a few spots where it says like, if feel free to homebrew this or feel free to change this. They kind of, I guess it's not really a spoiler, but kind of, they're the standing stones that are sprinkled throughout the map. They have like 2 sentences, and they're left completely up to the GM on what they want to do with them. If they want to use them, great. If they don't, great. So they have some of that built in that you can do. And to be fair, I did not sit one day and read the whole book one day.
Okay, that does make me feel a little better.
How long had I been? We started in like August, and then we didn't like really pick up until January or December.
Yeah.
So I had like
December,
5 months to read it, and I did like Post-it notes, and I took notes, and yeah. So it took me like 4 or 5 months to read it all the way through, and then I watched tons of YouTubes, and then I just yeah, and TikToks in between. Yeah. So it took me like 4 months to read it all, and then I refer to it quite a bit, but I have like the online one open when we're playing, but mostly I have my notes for the session set up. So I think if you are a new DM, I think it's great. But like with your complete homebrew world building, we're experienced enough that I think we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to read see, I've also tried to get through, well, I did try to GM Curse of Strahd, and the group fell apart separately because we were all work people, and then I ended up quitting that job and getting a different one. So like I didn't stick with the group, but I was trying to like read through the book before we started, and I really I felt like it was really all over the place. I felt like it really jumped around a lot. And I tried to read Descent into Avernus as well, and that was another one that I was like, maybe this just isn't for me. Where I just, so I feel like for me a lot of it was like identifying what I enjoy as a GM, and that has helped me sort of hone how I want to spend my time, so I don't spend as much time blocked.
So what are some ways, like, as you're spending time building this campaign, that you're finding sources of inspiration? Because I feel that's huge with my writer's block. If I'm stuck on a scene or I don't know how to progress, there are some habits I have that help me kind of get the juices flowing. What are some ways you figured out? Medicine?
Yes, Madison. Vices? Yeah, I have a couple vices that definitely help, right? Getting past that initial stage of taking the editor hat off, right? Taking that big self-critic hat
I
off.
think it's the self-critic, the overthinking and the perfectionism.
The overthinking.
I think that's really something a lot of writers struggle with, that perfectionism. Yeah.
Yeah. As Ed Sheeran would say, my bad habits lead to, I think, a better story, frankly. But there are lots of other ways to kind of ride that same high, if you will. Like getting outside, thinking about like, what is it like out here? We live in the woods, so I can like just now walk outside and like, what do the trees smell like? That's a weird thing to say, but like that helps me. Like, what kind of senses am I experiencing? Get outside, and it's like, we've got ravens here, which is super ominous, and I'm really into it. And it's like, what is it like to be outside when the ravens are coming by? Like, that's a really big bird. And I have that thought every single time they go by. So like getting those little snippets, those little like vignettes of something interesting, that's really helpful. You mentioned watching other actual plays or other D&D content. That helps me a lot too. But yeah, for me, a lot of my writing comes from, a lot of my story ideas come from like an interesting dream, an interesting conversation, a random idea that's kind of started from seeing some inspiration. I know we've talked many times about going to maps first or art first or some other source of like tactile sense of inspiration to help kind of act as a jumping off point. And then usually once I have something like, okay, the sun is dripping liquid gold and it lands on the planet. Oh, and then what about, and then just go, just like let it flow out as fast as you can. Like just dump it onto the page, whether that's typing because you're a fast typist, or speaking into a recording and then typing it up later. Just whatever it takes to get all of it out so you can start refining it as soon as it's on the page.
That's the biggest. That's the biggest way to get over writer's block, is just to write. You just write it out. You
Right.
stream of consciousness,
Yeah.
and you can always delete it later. So yeah, I highly recommend doing like writing sprints, or doing like setting a timer and trying to see how many, words you can get, or racing against someone else, because it just don't stop, keep going, and then it's like you hit in a different gear or something. All of a sudden your brain like re-engages and goes, oh yeah, this is how the story's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And then you can just take off. So yeah, going outside's nice.
Yeah.
I don't remember
You
last
also
time I
mentioned
saw sunshine. But
Oh, you should. We need to have you over. So you also mentioned when we talk about media consumption, you talk
Mhm.
about reading.
Mhm.
I have a very short attention span. If you hadn't gathered that, and so in addition to books, which I sometimes can just power through and love to read, and sometimes it's like a real chore. Um, I do read a lot of webtoons. I
Mhm.
read a lot of webtoons.
Mhm.
I watch a lot of TV and movies, particularly dramas. Right now I'm really into K-dramas. And there are a lot of really cool fantasy K-dramas that have helped sort of spark inspiration. The source material is super different. Obviously, we're used to fantasies from a Western like mythology set.
Yeah,
So watching East Asian fantasy television is so different and refreshing, and has given me some of the most exciting ideas because the source material is completely different.
it
Like
is.
it's an entirely different culture and set of mythology, which I think generates something really fresh. Or unique to me, I should say, fresh to me.
No,
'Cause it's
no,
not
you're
fresh to them.
right.
They've been
You're right. Yeah.
watching it forever.
Yeah, because the Western mythologies, I mean, a lot of D&D is inspired by
Yeah.
Western mythologies. So you would
And
definitely
it gets
bring
kind of boring.
something fresh to the campaign. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? What are you partaking in order to get really good ideas?
So if I'm stuck, if I'm not actively writing, like if I wrote in the morning and I'm taking the afternoon off, I will browse Pinterest and look up pictures that kind of are related to the scene I'm working on. And I'll just like, we'll be watching TV, or I'll be like cooking dinner, and I just browse Pinterest and I'll just save pictures. And it just like kind of keeps it in the back of my mind. But it's also, I'm not actively writing. So it's kind of just inspiring, just kind of keeping it fresh. I listen to a lot of music, and I will make a playlist that pertains very specific to that scene or that chapter, and it'll be like one song or two songs, and I'll just play it on repeat while
Yeah.
I'm like quiet, because I can't, especially if there's words. I have a really
Mhm.
hard time. It's got to be instrumental. I have it on low, and I'll just keep it on repeat until I finish that scene, and it just kind of keeps like the tone consistent, I've noticed. And it's just something like I'll so what happens is I'll spend an hour trying to find the right song, and
Correct,
then
yeah.
20
And then you'll
minutes
settle
writing
on
the scene.
Sid Meier's
Yeah.
Civilization 6 soundtrack, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Baba Yetu. That one is just,
Yes.
oh, it's so good. Yeah.
Or the
So
Stardew Valley soundtrack. I do like that for listening to. Or there's some really good playlists on YouTube that
mhm.
I just absolutely love that are like 19th century villain, and you slowly realize you're a 19th century hero and you slowly realize you're becoming the villain. Like
Oh,
something like that. Like some of these like crazy long playlists, like long titled playlists. They're a lot of fun and they're really good inspiration. And then I often will end up using those playlists in the session, and
yeah.
find that the pacing of the session tends to line up with the music really well. We've had a couple
That's
of
so
really
good.
impactful moments where something will swell as something is swelling in the story, and it's like it's what I wrote to, so it kind of makes sense. I wouldn't expect the pacing to have worked out so well, but then you have this reaction, this really visceral reaction from the players who are like, oh, I can't believe that this music, it's the timing is perfect. We've had that so many times in Strahd too, like
Yeah.
the timing
Yeah.
was perfect, this was really an
You're
important
just,
moment, and this
what?
music swelled, and you're like, oh my gosh, what?
Yeah. There's another TTRPG, Alice is Missing, that has a
Yes.
playlist, 90-minute playlist that coincides with the game. And I listen to some pieces of it. It's really good songs. It's really good, but you can play it while you're playing the game because it has the right tone the whole time as the story progresses. But yeah, I love that when we're in session and the right song comes on, because I have it usually set to randomized, and the right song will come on at the right time and it'll be like, heck yeah, that's perfect, or something. Someone will be like a deep RP and these two players are back and forth and just like the right song comes on.
It's perfect.
Magical. So yeah, Pinterest, music. I will do quite a bit, for example, with Bridge of Eternity, which I'm working on the sequel right now. There's a lot of mythology, a lot of Mesopotamian, Sumerian mythology. Boy, there's a lot. And so I'm trying to work through that. So I'm watching a lot of historical YouTubes that talk about it. I'm reading a lot of articles that talk about it. So when I'm not actively writing, I'm doing that. And that just kind of keeps everything, the juices going. So when I sit down to write, it's like kind of in the back of my head. So how many times can Sarah say juices this episode?
I feel like you got a couple more in you.
Juices. Every time I say juices, take a drink.
Well, we're gonna call it there.
Yeah. So those are some. With D&D, I get a lot of inspiration from watching other streamed D&D campaigns sessions that I feel so good after I watch like a full session online, and then I go in onto mine. Like, it just reaffirms that what I'm doing is right. I'm saying the right things. I'm making the right calls. It's just reaffirming like, oh, I am doing this right. Oh, okay. It's just, I don't know, that overthinking, I guess. So I do that.
Do you find yourself watching those and making guesses on where the story might go, and then it goes somewhere different? You're like, well, that's my idea now then.
Yes. Yeah. And then there's other times too where I'm just like, I have no idea where the story is going. Yeah. If I was a player, I would be so lost right now. This is way over my head. Way too, like, the lore is so deep and so heavy, and they're like eating it up. But I'm like, this is not my skill. But yeah, there's a few times that I'm like, I would have done something different. So yeah, so those are some ways I like it. I think us talking D&D in our group chat always is giving me new ideas. The players come up with great ideas. And so every now and then I'll write something down and be like, maybe later it'll come up.
There's a lot of it is now when a player says like, wow, a warehouse, is that like a werewolf house? You're like, it is now. Like, when they have a good suggestion, you go with it.
Yeah. So I've also noticed that when I'm working on writing, like, for example, with my mythology, doing a lot of mythology stuff, I see a lot of overlap with D&D, and that always makes me excited. Tiamat was from Mesopotamian mythology. So
I did not know that.
Yes. So that may or may not be in a future book or campaign. I don't know.
Or both.
Or both.
Porque no los dos. Absolutely.
Yeah. So reading. I think reading as a DM, even if it's like pretty pictures, historical stuff.
Webtoons all day.
And then just keeping healthy mindset. It's like the perfectionist, you gotta like 98%, 95% is good. It's okay. And it doesn't, perfectionism will just, you'll never get it perfect. And you just
silence the inner critic.
Accept that. Hopefully these tips help you overcome your writer's block and boost your creativity with your storytelling and your campaigns.
Get your creative juices flowing.
Oh, juices again.
Juices
there it again. It just works. Creative juices.
It is a good word for that.
This episode.
Well, we've been. Juice would sponsor us. No juice would sponsor us.
If you feel constipated because of your writing, Benefiber easily dissolves in water.
Ground psyllium husk. Oh boy. I'm desperately gonna try to just, we can't juice this anymore.
Gotta do it.
We've been out of initiative, but we're gonna get back into it. So get out there, roll some dice, tell some stories, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye!
Thanks for listening to Out of Initiative, a podcast from Merely NPCs. For more from Sarah and Morgan, follow them on TikTok at Merely NPCs or visit them online at merelynpcs.com.